evening. A quick introduction to the folks you're going to be hearing from and talking to tonight. At the end of the table down there, Ms. Jacqueline Anciano, Acting Chief of Planning for RMA Planning, Wendy Strimley, County Counsel, Carl Holm, Director of the RMA. In the back here, you have Megan Osterman. She's going to be one of your facilitators tonight, so when we get to the group input section, she'll be bringing a microphone around to you so we can all hear what you're saying. And then Melanie Beretti on the other side of the room is another one of our facilitators. Megan's with the planning department. Melanie is our special programs manager. So this is the crew that we have here for you tonight. Just another little item. Probably noticed there's a few cameras. One of those cameras, this one over here, is with the Monterey County, tell me how to say it, Monterey County Government Channel. So I'm sure all of you watch it on a regular basis, your favorite channel. There is actually a public access television channel that the Monterey County has. So just so everyone's aware, you're being recorded audio there. Looks like there's some other cameras around the room too, but those are not the county's. So with that, I'm going to just flip it over to Carl real quick. He wants to do a quick introduction of his own for everyone, and then I'll take it back over.
Thank you, Brendan. Again, I'm Carl Holm. I'm the Director of the Resource Management Agency, and so we're taking the lead relative to developing the regulations that are required under Measure Z. And so this is an informal workshop. This is not a required public hearing. It's not a formal public hearing or public meeting in that sense. There was no actual legal requirement to notice it, but we're trying to get the word out. We sent a save the date out. We did send a notice out. We're trying to use our social media. It's kind of new for us, but we're trying to get it out through Facebook and Twitter that we have in the RMA. So hopefully the information is getting out there. We also published a notice to make sure everybody's aware. We have received a number of email questioning the way we've noticed it, or people haven't gotten notice. So that's why we have the list in the back to make sure we're getting everybody's contact information. As the emails are coming in, because they're coming to me since my name was on the notice, we're adding everybody to the list so that we're building the list. So we can get that information out as we move along through this process. And it is going to be a process, and this is just the very beginning. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for public participation. We don't have anything formal tonight, like a draft ordinance or anything like that. This is the very first step. So also what this meeting is not. It's not a debate over Measure Z. It's not whether it was pro or con, good or bad, right or wrong, whether you like it or you don't, how you voted. That's not what this meeting is here tonight. We're not debating oil operations. Are they good or bad? Do they do it right? Do they not? What are they doing? What are they not doing? That's not the purpose of this meeting. What we're trying to do is inform you of, we're assuming that Measure Z is in place and it's legal. So that's the preface for tonight's meeting. That we're moving, whatever's happening from a legal realm is in a different world. It's outside this world that's in here tonight. We want to inform about the regulations that we are directed to under Measure Z to implement. Measure Z does a lot of things as far as identifying what does need to happen, but it does leave some space for us to develop regulations. And the team here tonight is going to go into that and explain what that is, and that's going to be what we're going to have the discussion about, is that process of where we have the ability under Measure Z to fill in those gaps. So are there any questions on that before we get started? Okay? Oh, Bill.
Have you guys evaluated the strength of your defenses against a takings lawsuit?
That's not what we're here to talk about tonight,
You're
Bill.
walking right into it.
As I mentioned, tonight is the preface that Measure Z is in place. It's operative. We're moving forward as it directs. That's a different conversation for outside this room tonight. Okay?
It will be held, and
I'm sure
it will make the proceedings of this room look stupid.
it's concurrent. It's two different tracks.
So I'm gonna take it back over if that's okay. So one of the things we're actually going to do tonight is address the fact that there are exemptions to Measure Z. One of those exemptions being takings. So what we're trying to do is establish a process for how we get those decisions on whether or not it's takings to the hearing bodies. Get it in front of the Board of Supervisors. So that's exactly why we're here tonight. So your question is a very valid one and a good one. It's obviously topical because that's one of the reasons we're here. So that sort of gets me to my next point. What I would like to ask from everyone, just to make this a smooth meeting, this is a public forum. We got to be respectful of each other's thoughts and beliefs and everything like that. One thing I would ask would be, let us do our presentation, get to the end. We're going to have a question and comment at the end. Hopefully what we get through our presentation, most of your questions will be answered. I'm sure they won't all be answered. That's why we're here. What we're going to do is, here in a moment, we'll pass out note cards to everybody. So as we're going through, if you think of something, you don't have to try to remember at the back of your head. You take a note, and at the end we'll go around and make sure we can answer your questions. So just bear that in mind as we go through. We definitely want to hear from you, but we would like to give you the presentation that we all worked on to be here tonight to share with you guys. So Carl did a good job talking about the meeting purpose. After that, we're going to go through an overview of Measure Z, both from the land use side of things to talk about what the sort of impacts are. And then Wendy's going to go through from a legal perspective what the sort of definitions of the actual exemptions might be and how we look at it, possibly moving those forward. Then we'll move into the public input section, and this is a part that I'm actually really excited about because we actually get to work with you, the public, to talk about how we want to implement processing these exemptions. So we don't have a process totally in place yet for how we're going to get the exemptions for, say, takings through to the Board of Supervisors for approval or denial or decision. So one thing we want to do is we want to talk to you guys, since you're the reason we're here. We want to find out your ideas on what's the best process, how do we get you guys involved, when do we get you involved, how often, things like that. So again, that's the big reason why we're here tonight. We get to that public input section of the evening. And then lastly, we'll do a wrap up where we review everything that we talked about in brief, just make sure we captured everybody's ideas, we didn't misrepresent everything, make sure everyone's head's going like this at the end of the night, yeah, okay, you got it. And then we'll move on from there. And obviously part of that is going to be when we get to your questions on your cards. So with that, next slide please, Frida. We did the introductions. I guess I already jumped ahead on this. A couple housekeeping items. Restrooms, I know it's important, through those doors to the right if anyone needs to go. There's also a drinking fountain over there. Everyone knows where the exits are. I feel like I'm a flight attendant. I think that's probably good for now. We talked about the goals and the outcomes, so next slide, Frida. Carl did a good job talking about the purpose of why we're here. Obviously, Measure Z authorizes the Board of Supervisors to adopt a process for the initiative. We're going to be drafting those procedures and have to present them back to the Board at a notice public hearing. That's where Carl mentioned you're going to have a lot of opportunities to give your input as we move this forward. That's really why we're here. So next slide, Frida. I'm going to move on now. Jacqueline Anciano is going to come up and talk to you about the provisions and effects of Measure Z.
Brandon, maybe before you do that, as far as copies of this being available.
Oh, sure, yeah, thanks. That's another good housekeeping item, sure. So copies of the PowerPoint tonight are going to be available afterwards. We'll put them up on our website. Anybody that signs up on the sign-in sheet will get copies of that as well. Obviously, when you sign up on the sign-in sheet, like Carl said, you'll be added to our distribution list. Anytime we have any further public meetings or anything that we're working on goes out to that list. That's the list we have to work with. So yeah, this will be available afterwards as well. And like I said, the video, you can actually go and, if you really want to watch this again, you can go on the government cable channel and watch it again. So with that, I will now turn it over to Jacqueline Anciano.
In November of 2016, the voters of Monterey County passed Measure Z. And so Measure Z is currently being litigated, and one element that is in effect that we're moving forward with is the development of procedures to implement Measure Z. What does Measure Z do? What are the effects of Measure Z as the voters voted it in? One is to prohibit land uses that support stimulation treatments, and well stimulation treatments include hydraulic fracturing and acid well stimulation. Okay? What is the other thing that it does? It prohibits the drilling of new oil and gas wells. Now, the prohibiting the drilling of new oil and gas wells does not affect gas wells that were drilled prior to the effective date of Measure Z, of the implementation of Measure Z. And that includes wells which are not or have not been abandoned. Okay, so we want to be really clear about what Measure Z does. And the other thing that it does is it phases out land uses that support oil and gas, wastewater injection, and that includes impoundment. So we want to be clear as to, it's that simple. Well, it seems simple. So what we're here to do today is to develop procedures for public involvement relative to vested rights, and our county council is going to speak on these items: vested rights, reasonable
exemptions.
yeah, exemptions, and I'll let county council speak to the 3 items.
Thanks, Jacqueline. So, I hope I'm holding this mic correctly. I'm Wendy Strimling. I'm a senior deputy county counsel with the Office of County Counsel, and I want to talk a little bit about the exemptions under Measure Z, because part of what we want your input on is how to implement those exemptions. So, Frida, next slide. Okay, so just a quick overview, and I'm going to go through each of these. There's basically 3 exemptions under Measure Z. 1, to avoid an unconstitutional taking of property. 2, to recognize vested rights. And 3, to allow a reasonable amortization period to discontinue the land uses in support of oil and gas wastewater injection or impoundment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of these mean, because there's a lot of legal leads. So on to the next slide, please. So what I'm going to do for each one, I'm going to give you, this is like Shakespeare. Have you ever seen the Shakespeare play where you hear all the Shakespeare plays in 30 minutes? That's what this is, because for example, takings, there's a great deal of case law on takings. There's a whole body of law. There are legal specialists who specialize in takings, so you've got to bear with me. We're at the 60,000 foot level in terms of summarizing each of these principles, but in order to understand, to start to be able to think about what the exemptions and what that process should look like, I want to just give you a super quick summary of what the legal standard is. So I'll give you the legal standard and then go into the exemption. So takings, you may have heard that expression, it derives from the 5th Amendment of the United States Constitution. One of those provisions provides that government shall not take private property for public use without just compensation. And so one of the issues in case law, there are many aspects to this, is when does a government regulation affect a taking? And the standards, and this again is a super quick summary, there are per se takings. If the regulation results in a permanent physical invasion of property, that you can think of it as almost like a trespass. There's something physical of your property being taken. If it denies the property owner of all economically beneficial use of the property, the courts have held that is a per se taking. But a lot of takings claims fall into this next category, which is it may not deny the property owner of all economically beneficial use of the property, but a good deal of economically beneficial use. So when does that regulation rise to a taking? Under the county's police power, the county is entitled to do land use regulation for the public health, safety, and welfare. But when is it, what is the outer limit? When the regulation is so onerous it amounts to a taking. And the courts have said that you have to do an ad hoc factual inquiry on a case-by-case basis. And some of the key factors they look at are, what is the economic impact on the owner? What is the interference, or is there an interference with what's called investment-backed expectations? What was the expectation of that owner when they made investment? And the character of the action. So that's your thumbnail sketch of the standard for takings. Okay, on to the Measure Z exemption, next slide. So one of the key exemptions in the ordinance is that it is not intended to effect a taking. And so it allows the Board of Supervisors to grant an exception in how the measure is applied to a particular circumstance if the board finds, and it has to be based on substantial evidence, that applying Measure Z would constitute an unconstitutional taking of property. And if and when they grant that exception, it can only allow additional or continued land uses only to the minimum extent necessary to avoid the taking. And so the couple things, the parameters in the ordinance that, in Measure Z that are defined is that this process is started by a request of the affected property owner, and the decision maker is the Board of Supervisors. One of the things, and we're going to come back to each of these exemptions, and one of the reasons we're here is we want to fill in the gaps. What happens, what does the process look like between the owner asking for this process to start and the Board of Supervisors deciding based on substantial evidence? So we'll be coming back to these slides. Brandon's going to help work us through getting your input on some of your ideas for filling in the gap about what that process is. Okay, on to the second exemption, which is vested rights. Okay, this is another area that could take volumes, could take a whole law school course on what a vested right is. But in the land use context, is basically if a property owner obtains a land use entitlement, and it's a validly issued land use entitlement, then they obtain a vested right once they have performed substantial work and incurred substantial liabilities in good faith reliance upon the permit. Sometimes that is sometimes summarized as they got a building permit and they broke ground. And that's a simple way to reduce that sort of complicated formula, but that's the sort of landmark standard. Once that owner has a vested right, that's a fundamental property right. So what does that really mean? I was thinking about that driving over here. It really means like, once the county's issued a permit to some owner and they've gone ahead and they've broke ground and let's say they built that building that we issued them a permit for, they now have a fundamental vested right in that building that's very difficult for the county to take away. Okay? There are some circumstances, for example, if they gave us fraudulent information, we may have to hold a hearing, have this due process, all kinds of stuff like that. That's not an issue here today. So the only thing here that's relevant for Measure Z is that once the right is vested, generally, even if we later change that regulation, we cannot prohibit the use that we previously authorized. So for example, we issued, let's say the county issued an oil and gas well permit to an oil company 30 years ago. And they're out there drilling, for oil. With that oil well, we permitted. It was valid, it was legal at the time, even though now Measure Z says no more new oil and gas drills. We cannot, in general, okay, I'm just going to say in general, go in and tell them, oh, we changed our mind with Measure Z, you can't drill anymore under that permit we already validly issued to you. But there's a lot of complexity in the middle of that, like what was authorized by that permit? Where did that permit allow the oil drilling? How much oil drilling? There's a lot of questions about what right was vested. Okay, so moving on to the Measure Z, next slide is the exemption. Measure Z recognizes this and says, nothing in this initiative, that's Measure Z, it was an initiative measure, which means it was submitted to put together by the voters and put on the ballot and voted on by the voters. Nothing in this initiative shall apply to prohibit any person or entity from exercising a vested right. So the initiative recognizes a vested right. But there is one exception where government can phase out a vested right with a reasonable amortization period. We're going to get to that in a minute. That's the third exception. But in regard to determining does an oil company say, have a vested right, again, the process doesn't have much on process in Measure Z. So what process should the county follow to decide whether an owner has a vested right? That's going to be one of the things we're going to come back to. Okay, now I'm going to go on to the third exemption, which is the reasonable amortization. Remember I told you that's kind of an exception to the vested right. I told you before, we can't just willy-nilly take away somebody's rights to operate under a permit that was issued validly that they have been using. But actually, once we've changed the rules, which in some ways Measure Z changes the rules, then some of those uses become legal nonconforming. So what is legal nonconforming use? That's a use that was lawful when it was permitted, but it no longer conforms to, say, general plan or zoning, because that general plan, policy, or zoning has changed. So that has happened to some degree with some of these Measure C regulations. A zoning regulation may provide for the eventual termination of a legal non-conforming use without compensation, but if it does that, it has to do a reasonable amortization period, which is basically, as the measure sort of says, it's sort of a phase-out period, and the idea is you're giving time for the owner to recoup their investment. That is a reasonable time to recover the permit holder's investment, and that's based on a case-by-case factual determination. That's kind of, again, the thumbnail summary of the law, what reasonable amortization means. So going to the next slide, here's what Measure Z says about reasonable amortization. Basically says that and this is really only applies to the provision relating to oil and gas, wastewater injection, or impoundment. Measure Z says, after 5 years, you've got 5 years from the effective date of the measure, oil company, to discontinue or phase out your use of oil and gas, wastewater injection, or impoundment. So it basically kind of presumes that 5 years is a reasonable period to recoup the investment. However, the owner may apply for an extension of that period. 5 years isn't enough, the owner contends. Next slide. So here's the process in Measure Z. It designates, it's the Planning Commission who makes this decision. Planning Commission may extend the amortization period, that 5-year period, if, and these are the standards in Measure Z, the applicant had a vested right to conduct the land uses as of the effective date. So they had a permit they were operating under, we know what a vested right is now, and the applicant shows, based on substantial evidence, so fact-based kind of evidence, that 5 years is not enough. It's not a reasonable amortization period, basically not enough to recoup your investment. But the extension is only can be granted for the minimum time necessary, and it cannot exceed an additional 10 years. So you can't get more than 15 years total from the effective date. And so again, the Measure Z gives us some parameters for the process. It's initiated by the request of the affected property owner. The decision maker is the Planning Commission at a noticed public hearing, and the decision may be appealed to the board, and then the board would presumably conduct a hearing. So, okay, so now we have a little summary chart. That was a lot of law in 10 minutes. But what we want to do today is get, like I said, filling in the gaps. What are your ideas for how the process should be written? What we're going to do is we are going to write ordinances. We're going to bring those ordinances to the Board of Supervisors, and there will be a hearing at the Board of Supervisors to establish these procedures. And the procedures will be for the vested rights determination, the prevent takings, and the reasonable amortization period. And the thing here in the chart, we filled in the parts that Measure Z has already filled in for us, but we've got a lot of other parts to fill in. And we have some, and so we really want your input about what that process should look like. And maybe it's the same process, maybe it's a different process for each of these, maybe they overlap. So I'm going to hand the mic back to Brandon now.
So as Wendy said, we're going to go through each of the 3 exemptions that we talked about. And the goal here is to fill in the gaps that we don't have answers to on our process yet. It's something we're going to have to do and ultimately take it forward to the Board of Supervisors for approval. But we want to get your input on it before we start working. So first one to talk about, takings exemptions process. What I have up here at the beginning is, this is the sort of definition that Wendy laid out for you. And then what I want to do, the way I want to do this, is sort of ask the questions, and then just like in school, raise your hand, someone will come over to you, give you the microphone, give us your input. We're going to write it down up on the board, so that way when we leave here, we have everything that you guys told us. We don't miss anything. So if everyone remembers with the takings, this one's already decided that it will be going to the Board of Supervisors. So that whole we don't need to fill in. However, what we do need to fill in is a process for gathering that information and getting it to the Board of Supervisors. So some things we've been throwing around as ideas to give you a jumping off point are does the planning department staff take something to the planning commission then recommends to the board of supervisors, and the board of supervisors makes the decision. That's one process. Do we go to a hearing officer, like an administrative law judge, an ALJ? Do we prepare a report for an ALJ, go to them, they make a recommendation, that goes to the board of supervisors, and then the board of supervisors adopts from there? Is there something else that you guys would like to talk about? So this first question is really just talking about the process. The next question to start thinking about, but this one is sort of like how the public is going to stay involved throughout that process. So we'll get there. But this first one, let's just focus on how we get from somebody says, I want to find out if I have a true exemption, to getting in front of the board of supervisors. So anybody want to be the brave first soul to raise your hand and offer an opinion? Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Carruthers. Because the fundamental premise of this whole measure is erroneous, there has been no contamination of an aquifer by the oil furnace. My suggestion is that we make an exemption for the actual territory presently occupied.
So Bill, I'm going to cut you off. I hate to do this. I'm going to cut you off, but one thing we got to do is we got to stay on topic. We're here to talk about specific things tonight.
Make that area exempt from the provisions of the law and apply it to the rest of Monterey County.
So knowing that we have to go to the board of supervisors because that's what the measure says, how do we get to the? How does your suggestion get us to the board of supervisors?
Easy. It applies to every other part of Monterey County except that particular area.
Which particular area?
Where the Chevron and ARA.
Okay. I don't think the measure allows for us to carve out sections of the county. We need to get anybody forward to the board of supervisors. So I appreciate the input, but it's not quite where we're thinking at right now.
So we're gonna
move on here to the next
some
one.
other thoughts,
Yep.
ideas?
I was really, sorry, my name is Mary Shaw Koran. I was intrigued by your statement that it could be an administrative judge rather than the planning commission that reviews the information before making a recommendation to the supervisors. Is that correct?
That's correct. Could be a hearing officer.
Oh,
That's,
hearing
yeah,
officer.
yeah.
But could you explain that a little more? Because I'm not really familiar. I'm
Yeah.
familiar
Sure.
with the planning commission.
Yeah,
but not
I mean,
Council
that's
explain that for you.
Explain what it is.
yeah. What
Mel, do you want to give Wendy the mic? I don't want her talking into this one. That would be
The
awkward.
board, under the measure, the board of supervisors makes the final decision, okay? But somebody, so the question is, does somebody make a recommendation? So you're right, in a regular land use project now, for example, it goes to Resource Management Agency, the planner or the planning staff make a recommendation to the board, and then, to the planning commission, let's just say, or to the board, depending on who the decision maker is, and then maybe the planning commission makes a recommendation to the board of supervisors, that kind of thing. But the hearing officer idea is, for example, you can have like an administrative law judge who's a neutral, and what they would be doing is, say, sitting in a room and taking evidence, because instead of having everybody get up at the mic and the applicant talks for 5 minutes and then everybody gives 3 minutes to talk, since the takings determination is, as I mentioned to you, it's about the economic impact, the investment-backed expectations. There's going to be all this kind of business monetary information. That type of evidence would be being presented to like a neutral hearing officer. So it might be like an all-day hearing, and it wouldn't necessarily be constrained by like 3 minutes here or 3 minutes there.
But I'm going to jump in. It is important to note, though, that it's still a public hearing.
Well,
It's
it
still
would-
open to
it
the
would
public.
be
There's just
open
no
to the-
testimony by
It'd
the
be
public.
open to the public, but it might not be a Brown Act meeting, for example. It might be, because under the Brown Act, anytime there's like anything on the agenda, every member of the public can stand up and talk and speak to it. This might be open to the public, but you'd be sitting in the room, but it would almost be like a courtroom proceeding. It'd be like a quasi-judicial, where that hearing officer is sitting there, taking the evidence. Sometimes in an evidentiary hearing, there's a right of cross-examination too. So normally in a planning commission type hearing, it's just sort of, everybody just talks to the decision maker, but there's no questioning back and forth. But if you've ever been more in a courtroom type, it would be like kind of an informal courtroom type setting.
So that's another.
That's sort of a whole model that
Yeah.
we could do. That's one of the ideas. You guys hate that idea, you like that idea.
So that's kind of what exactly, but Wendy posed the question
But they
first.
wouldn't make the ultimate decision. They would then maybe write a report with all the information that they gathered and their conclusion. You know, this would be a takings if you said this, would not be a takings if your regulation did this. And then that information, that report, if you will, would go to the Board of Supervisors, which would be a public setting, and then in the public setting, everybody would still be able to get up and speak to the recommendation that was made, but sort of all the technical, factual findings would have been done to some degree by the hearing officer. So that's just sort of a different model.
Thanks. So that's a good, thank you, Wendy, for giving us that overview of what a hearing officer is versus the planning commission. So I'm going to actually go back to the question then, because I want to give you an opportunity to, now that you know what that is, what's your opinion? I mean, do you have a preference? Which one sounds better to you? No pressure. You're just deciding it's not something for everybody right now. So.
Yeah, this is just me personally, I'm not speaking for any group.
Of course.
But it sounds to me like, just kind of exploring out loud, that the this neutral administrative judge would be less biased, perhaps, and especially because some of the information could be quite technical. And I think even the planning commission of appointed people may have more difficulty with that. So I'm just thinking that.
So what I'm hearing then is that an ALJ, so what I'm hearing from you is an ALJ or hearing officer is potentially going to be more neutral, less biased than, say, a planning commission, which may have some politics involved in it. So that might be a benefit to going that route with the hearing authority or the hearing officer. Thank you. That was a good example of what we're trying to do here. Just this is meant to be your opinion. We're going to get up as many opinions as we can, so we have a jumping off point.
And if I can just add one quick clarification, because I sort of come at this from our department as a bit more of a layperson. You guys don't have to understand necessarily all the processes, but if you like the concept of a neutral, non-political body making the legal decision, if you like the process of being able to have question-answer as opposed to just public comment, we're open to that.
That's
so
what
you
we
don't
need
have to
help with.
understand all the underlying process. That's our job. So please feel free. But thank you. There's someone here.
Yes, I have a question. The administrative law judge, is this a trained lawyer? Is this someone with a legal degree? And are they already existing in the county? Where do you find them? And what are their qualifications for making a judgment as opposed to the planning commission's qualifications?
So that's a really good question, and that's part of what, for example, we do a procedure that says it should be an administrative hearing officer. The ordinance for writing could state what the qualifications need to be. But typically, with a hearing officer, they are a lawyer, and they, the legal, we do use, for example, the county uses a neutral hearing officer for code enforcement hearings, and we've gone two different ways with that. We have a definition of hearing officer in county code, which requires that they sort of be a neutral, both be trained as an attorney and be a neutral. And right now we use the George Law School has sort of an administrative law judge type program, and so they send down an administrative law judge from the George Law School program, and we're under the county contracts with them. We've also in the past used, I can't remember what they're called, the Office of Administrative Law, or the state has like a stable of administrative law judges. They can be kind of expensive, but we've used them also. And one of the issues would be who pays for this, what's it called? The Office of Administrative Law Judge. I can't remember the name of that office, but one of the issues would be who pays for this. And so we might put that in the ordinance too, that if we go that route, that the applicant would pay for the service, but they wouldn't select the person. It would have to be a neutral, selected judge.
So I think that's the important takeaway from what Wendy's telling everybody is that the hearing officer of the ALJ is going to be a neutral, non-county employee. That's something.
So given that, would you, either question or thoughts on?
The follow-up question is that throughout Measure Z, it does refer to the Planning Commission, but you're saying it's within the scope of the implementation body to go other than the planning commission?
So there are certain, so some of the takings, that's what we were trying to present earlier. Some of the takings already have predetermined places where they have to go.
Go back
We're
to
trying to fill
Matrix.
in, the hole. So for reasonable amortization, in the measure, it actually says that will go to the planning commission. On the other hand, vested rights, it actually doesn't say where it goes. It's up to us to determine, to work with you guys, to work on our own, to go through the board of supervisors, ultimately for them to make the decision where it goes. So we have to fill in those holes. That's kind of what we're talking
So
about.
the only hole there is the vested rights one for who?
Well, right.
For who the decision maker
On
is.
take-
We,
on the
we
take-
have the opportunity to fill in the process of how it gets to those decision makers, and that's really what we're trying to do. So do you have any thoughts on the actual process of getting it to those decision makers?
Do you like the idea, so we're talking about taking, so do you like the idea of an administrative judge, a neutral party, as a step-in process?
It sounds better than a political.
Okay, so get another plus for
So-
neutral.
Neutral body sounds,
yeah.
sounds good.
Yep, good, okay. Who's next?
Others?
We got one up here, Mel.
Thank you. Don't forget your name, please.
My name is Andy Shaw Coron, and my question is in terms of public notice regarding this process starting, is how much lead time does, and how public is your public notice to engage
Jack, you
the
go back to the
public?
slide hey, there you go. So we're skipping ahead, but I think they're intertwined, so it's fair to start talking about this too. So that's sort of our next bullet we want to talk about, and we can go back and forth between the two, is the level of the input and the structure for the input. So your question is right on target, is what, we're asking you, why don't you, we have to develop that process still, there's nothing in place. How early, how often do you want to be brought into the fold of this conversation?
Well, I would just think that any time anybody ever asks for an exemption, the public should be noticed.
Okay, so anytime an exemption request comes into the county, the public is
Right,
noticed.
if I may, under the current county code, when we do public notices for projects, we do have some criteria there. We have to mail it, post the property, and advertise it. And those are the three different noticing venues, and it has to be out at least 10 days prior to the hearing. We're obligated, the ones that we mail out is a 300-foot radius. So 300 feet, and we do that, the way we interpret that is we measure 300 feet from the property line. So that's the way the code is currently, if we were to follow the current process.
So can I just ask for clarification? What I heard you say, and I don't know if it's what you intended, is that when an application is submitted, you'd like your thought is you would like the public to know at the time it's submitted, not just when it goes to hearing. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
And
So Frida, did you catch that? I just want to make sure, it's most important to us that we capture these thoughts, so if you don't mind,
Yep.
patience.
Couldn't yell it out.
I think you have to
Public
follow up now.
receive notice during
Anytime
application comes in.
Can I
Yes.
just a follow-up to that?
Yes, absolutely.
Which is, given that this is not your standard building permit, this is about an initiative that the public got engaged in, throughout the entire county, people were involved in it. I think the notice should go far beyond just simply the immediate region of a project.
So your suggestion would be larger than the 300-foot radius?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You got that one, Frida?
We had a
Bigger
hand
than
here
300.
first, and then we'll go right there. Thank you.
This question is for all three of the presenters. What do you believe is the most important consideration in making law? The science of the situation or a vote by a very poorly uninformed public?
Well, lucky for you, we're not here to get our input tonight. We're
That's a
actually here to
big
get public
question
input.
here, because ultimately that's what this whole thing boils down to.
So we are a public agency, we serve the public. And so as part of that,
So
we are trying to get
science be
input from the
damned.
public.
The fact that they've never contaminated anything, and agriculture has been a terrible polluter.
No one has said anything about science being damned. All we're talking about is trying to get input on the process for getting something in front of the
That's what it
decision
amounts
maker.
to.
I appreciate your input, we're gonna take the microphone now and move on to
Go
somebody else.
right ahead,
Thank
this is foolishness.
Okay, then you're welcome to leave if you want, it's an open
No,
meeting.
I'm not leaving. I don't
By all
want to
means,
hang here till
stay
the
and have a-
very end,
I'm glad
because
you're here.
this is
Process,
crazy.
I'm glad you're
We
here.
have a question right here then, thank you, and would try to minimize the side conversations if you can. It's easier for us to hear and capture thoughts and ideas.
I'm Dominic Dursa. Sorry if I'm not as entertaining as everybody else. But my question is just in terms of time. Once this information is being gathered, whether it be planning commission or go before a hearing officer, how long would the process be before it moves on to the board? So if it went to a hearing officer, would they have to make their decision that day if it was an all-day affair? Or would they have time to deliberate, and then how long would that time be?
So do you have an opinion on what would be a reasonable amount of time? A feel for what might feel like a good amount of time for you?
I don't necessarily have an opinion on what's a reasonable amount of time, but my only concern is if it goes to a hearing officer, I certainly appreciate the impartiality, but Salinas, Monterey County is a small place and everybody knows everybody. And that's when people start sending the text messages, the emails, and the influence seeps in. So I'm just wondering, would it be possible that the decision made that day, let's say at least like a 3-hour deliberation period by the officer?
So the recommendation.
To make a recommendation.
Okay.
Since we currently do that with our code enforcement, typically what the hearing officer will do is they'll take all the information and he will go back and depending on the amount of information, it could be 30 days, it could be a little bit longer. He may follow up with some questions to be answered, asking for additional documents, regulations, whatever, in order to formulate his decision. So if we were to go that route from an ordinance perspective, that's one of the things we would want to make sure is if there's a timeline tied to it, that we have the adequate timeline for that hearing officer to be able to make their decisions, come back to the county staff. We can then put it into a staff report and get it to the Board of Supervisors. So that would be probably at least a couple months in between the hearing officer and getting to the Board of Supervisors. That'd be minimum time frame.
And so if we want to take a note from your comment, we'll just probably put up here. It should be an expedient, quick process. I mean, we should look at ALJ versus Planning Commission making a recommendation. Which one's going to give us a faster outcome? Obviously, we need to balance that against the political and being unbiased and all that stuff. But consideration we should look at is how quickly the process moves.
And I just want to throw in, I mean, it's a good question, and it's a good question, and that's exactly the kind of thing in drafting the ordinance that I wrote down now, which is, we want to put in a time frame. As Carl was saying, we have some time frames in code enforcement ordinance, in our appeal process from Planning Commission to Board of Supervisors, so we should, if I'm hearing, it would be good to have some clarity in the ordinance about timing, about how long it takes to make the recommendation if the ALJ is doing that, and then how long to get it to the board. I think that's useful.
And also how many times they can come back. If they can come back once, I totally understand that. If it becomes a long, drawn-out process, then people end up focusing on the cost of the matter rather than what's actually going on.
That's good. How many times?
So Frida, the other element is consideration of how many times the judge can come back and forth?
Right.
Okay, how many times within the time frame the judge can come back and forth, which I think the premise would be potentially extending the time frame. Another thing you had mentioned, I don't know if it was something you wanted to, but I wanted to see if it was, you had asked about how quickly from when there's a decision, would it be available to the public?
To go to the board.
To go to the board. So the one thing I did want to say is, as soon as it's not a judgment, it's a recommendation. As soon as that recommendation is prepared and finalized by the ALJ hearing officer, that is a public document. So the actual recommendation from the officer could be available publicly once we receive it. The process to get to the board is then our time frame for being able to write the staff report, get in the queue, and get it before.
At least that's what we think right
That's what we
now.
think,
I mean, we think right now. I mean,
Okay.
we may be
We're gonna-
hearing from the oil
We're going to move
industry
on to
that
another. I
they
see
look
more
at it
hands going
differently.
up.
I
So
don't
we're
know.
going to move on to somebody who hasn't spoken yet.
Right there.
Okay, Megan Scott. Nice lady over here. Hi. That's okay.
My name is Jean Zlotkin. In terms of timing, I think, first of all, to kind of back this up a little bit, the timing of this whole process is brought on by the proponent that's raising these issues, who is also a part of a legal lawsuit that's going on in this county that's a derivative from Measure Z. All of this is a derivative of Measure Z. So it strikes me that in terms of timing, this whole process should be put off the exemption request is premature in timing and should be delayed, because the county has yet to adopt the language of the Measure Z in an ordinance. And that has happened because the same people who are bringing this about have filed those lawsuits. So whether it's a planning commission or an ALG, we have the same issue as to timing.
So I'll answer that really quickly. So one of the things we are able to do right now is work on this process in preparation for when it is effective. So what we're trying to do is get a little bit ahead of the game, and so that we have a process in place before it becomes effective. So that's why we're doing this right now.
Okay, and as to that process, although an administrative law judge might be preferable in terms of understanding the law, and this is going to be a lot of technical legal language that's at issue here, I would think that who chooses that, what body chooses that, you know, I know there's a neutrality, but we have to have, I think, a public component again, of potential people who would be chosen so as to establish that they have no
It's like a public list of who the potential hearing officers may be.
That's right, because we want to establish that they're not
public list.
connected with the oil industry or
Good, that's a good note,
other
thank you.
things. And one other thing,
Okay.
because it was raised already, in terms of the planning commission doing this and making a finding, it would seem to me that the finding should be based on, though they have to go through the process, they can make one of the findings that it's premature to request this exemption at this point in time. And the county, and they would recommend then to the supervisors to decide upon the language of the ordinance and get past the state before they do anything in this direction.
So I'm going to go back because we're just to reiterate, we're only developing the process right now. We won't be taking any exemptions. Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong here. We won't be taking any exemptions forward until this, or is that not?
Well, we're developing the process.
We're developing the process
Yeah,
right now.
I mean,
That's all we're
that-
doing.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm fully understanding the comments.
Well, her question is,
No,
let me reiterate for you.
no.
Her question is, well, if you don't understand, I think what she's saying, correct me if I'm wrong, ma'am, is why would we possibly move an exemption forward right now to the planning commission or hearing officer when the stay isn't even or it's not effective? My response was that we aren't moving anything forward yet. We're just developing the process.
So, yeah, yes, okay, so let me add a couple things. First of all, as you know, we have litigation on this matter. There is a stay. We're not here to talk about the merits and demerits, pros and cons of the stay. But the stay does not stop that part of the measure that allows the county to develop these procedures as well as implement these procedures. And so while the litigation is going on, it's possible for the county to, one, adopt the ordinances or ordinance that are going to implement these processes, and number two, then could get applications from property owners and whoever it is we've designated as the hearing body, and say ultimately the Board of Supervisors would then conduct hearings on whether or not these exemptions, the owners qualify for these exemptions. That could happen during the course of the litigation. And so I don't want to necessarily I have Rob Shaw from my office who's working on the litigation side. I don't know if you want to add anything to that at all, Rob?
Wendy, if I could, maybe. Let me put it into maybe a little different context. So with land use, we start with the general plan, establishes policies. Out of those policies, we develop ordinances for the implementation. Look at Measure Z as a general plan policy. It's been adopted, been approved by the voters, so we have that general plan policy. What we're talking about now is the ordinance that would implement that, and within that ordinance is this process that we're trying to get to. So some of that ordinance has already been crafted through Measure Z. We're now filling in those gaps, including the process. And just like the county's general plan, we've had litigation on it ever since the general plan's been adopted. We're implementing ordinances along the way. That litigation is running on a parallel track. So if you can think of it in that way, that might help understand kind of where we're at.
That's good. Thanks, Carl.
So
I'm gonna move it along here a little bit because we're only talking about takings at this point. We have two more exemptions to talk about, so we want to make sure we get everything you guys want to talk about with the process for getting the taking exemption through to the Board of Supervisors. So.
And we had someone over here.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
And
I agree, and that's a good point, because I want to talk about amortization.
Okay, so we'll get to that one soon. We're talking about.
As related to takings too.
Why don't we, that's fine, we could just do
Okay.
that.
Okay, this is about a four-part question, and the simple question is the 10 and the 15 years in the ordinance?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'm gonna hit pause on that one, because one thing I did ask at the beginning is if we could do like broader questions sort of at the end, so we can get through just the process stuff.
The next three parts of the question are dependent on
Okay, so are those questions,
that.
are you
Relevant
good
to.
to the process of getting to the board of supervisors?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
You're trying to avoid a takings. It's quite possible that you would not recover the cost of a well in 10 to 15 years. So if a well was drilled and the costs were not recovered, it could possibly be a taking. A.
Right.
Okay. Second part, I happen to have an irrigation well that is still very useful after 80 years. It was drilled in the early 1930s. How do you deal with the useful life as far as takings or amortization? And why I ask this question,
So
it's a little off topic, but the
Yeah.
Let me answer.
nuclear
well, Wendy,
plant,
I don't
they
want.
want to recommission it?
Okay,
Keep
so I'm
treating
gonna
it,
I'm gonna hit
and
pause
it's
on it really
not.
quick.
But where does useful life fit into the take?
That's
If we could, Wendy, I don't want to divert too far in answering specific
But
questions
I do want to have
about.
one thing on the record, though.
Okay, let me finish what I'm saying. So we're going to answer that one question, but moving forward, because we only have an hour left now until this meeting is over, we have to stay focused on what we're here for. And again, that is to discuss the process to get situations like this where you have a question, you want to get your decision about an exemption through to the Board of Supervisors. How do we get it there? We need to help develop the process.
So you're saying there might be a process for an exemption if the well wasn't paid for?
Yeah, let me just try to, I think that, the only reason I want to jump in is I want to clear up any confusion, okay? I mean, whether or not that's taking, I haven't opined on that, but I just, so first of all, the reasonable amortization period and the 15-year limit, that specifically applies to oil and gas, wastewater, injection, and impoundment. It's only that subset, okay? That's where the reasonable amortization
That
piece
wasn't
comes. Yeah, I know, I know this is a lot to take in, and that's why this is just such a start. This is just the beginning of the meeting.
And again, we're not defining anything in this meeting.
The second thing to say is, for example, you have a concern, you, property owner, anybody else. Once we have a process in place for the board to make a determination about takings, the ordinance contemplates that, say, you as an affected property owner would come in and make your case ultimately to the Board of Supervisors about why you think you are allowed to continue to use your well. Or you might fall under the vested rights exemption, which is you already have a use permit for that well, you've already been using it, and Measure Z is very clear that it doesn't prohibit existing wells. It says no new wells, but it doesn't say existing wells have to stop. So there's a lot of, unless you're doing wastewater injection and impoundment. So that's a little sidebar. So, yeah, I mean, to some degree, this ordinance, the more you read it, the more there's layers to understand. So what we're trying to do is, just try to kind of come back and look at the process, but, and then we're not here to try to decide people's individual situations, but this is also helpful in terms of just getting people to go back to the ordinances in the back and the initiative, and maybe opportunity to just like read it. And the PowerPoint will be online, and so that might help sort of begin to understand what the initiative does and doesn't do.
Okay, thanks. No, I still have this to look at here. Okay, so again, let's talk about the process for takings. We'll do a couple more, and then we're going to need to move on to the next one. So if you have something to talk about the process for getting takings to the Board of Supervisors, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, this is just a quick question about the process. I'm not understanding, similar to my friend here, if Measure Z passed and that meant no more well drilling, is that lawsuit making it so that other people can apply for permits? And while the litigation is going, they can apply for permits with the vested rights, and the only way of stopping them would be to rezone? Is that what I'm hearing?
So I don't want to sound like a broken record, but
Rita, can you write that one?
Yeah, we'll
Just
keep-
write the question down.
you read the question down
We'll
over
do it
here on the
later.
parking lot. So we're gonna have to start putting questions on the parking lot because I need to get through input on folks giving us ideas. If you like the idea of administrative law judge, do you think the planning commission should be making recommendations to the board of supervisors? How much public input should be involved in
Or
the
just
process?
go straight to the board.
Or just straight to the board. That's a possibility too. So anybody that hasn't spoken yet, then we can
We
circle
have
back
taking,
around.
so we're talking about takings, talking about process.
Well, this might be more than just taking. So my name is Kathy Miller. I have a question because we keep talking about this being a very public process, but I'm curious, as you're developing this process, how you're going to deal with confidential information that could be submitted by the companies. There's a lot of proprietary
Confidential
information.
Question mark.
Uh,
Okay, so
so
we'll come
that-
back to that one. Thank you. That's a good question, but we're gonna try to stay on,
No, but
I mean,
So one thing I can say is the question, details of how we handle it, we can put a note that as we're developing the process, we should contemplate confidentiality and be clear.
Yeah,
So-
okay.
So under
That's
process,
right.
we should contemplate to ensure confidentiality of individuals'
Well,
protected
let me
information. So if we can leave there.
I want to
and we can-
reframe that to just say this. The
use
issue
the microphone.
of whether
use my phone.
information would be confidential and what that means and how it would be handled is something that the ordinances should address. So that'll become an issue in the implementing ordinances. And so, staff will come up with a proposal in the draft ordinance, and then everybody will be able to say, yeah, we like this or we don't like this, before the ordinance is adopted. But I think it's flagging that is an issue that I'm hearing Kathy is raising from ERA's perspective.
And we have that up there. Brandon, do we want to, we know we're not gonna, this is the start of a process, do we want to move to the next?
We could, because it's gonna be a
section?
lot of the same questions about how the process is going to work, so some may still come up. There is an interesting wrinkle on the vested rights exemption process, if you remember back to the presentation. This is the one where there is not a defined decision maker yet. Where we were just at, the decision maker has already decided in the measure that it's going to be the board of supervisors. So questions for this one would be, thanks Jack, can I go back to the other slide? And so questions with this one would be, whatever we come up with a process for the takings exemption, should we just mirror it exactly the same so that everyone knows what to expect across all exemptions? That would be one outcome possibly. Should it be different? Where would it be different? If it's different, who would that decision maker be? Would it just be the planning commission appealable to the board of supervisors? Who wants to give first thought on this one?
Okay, vested rights process.
Well, again, since it might be in front of since it might be in front of the administrative law judge,
Mhm.
that was what was talked about in the previous one. One of the questions, I've been involved in employment law before and representing people, and we often went in front of administrative law judges. The issue was, if it was in front of an administrative law judge, would essentially pros and cons on the issue both have the opportunity to make presentations in front of that administrative law judge as if it was like a trial.
From the public or just from the folks actually involved
From
with?
those who want to grant an exemption or recognize a vested right, and those who say there is no vested right.
So what I'm hearing is for vested rights, you'd like us to, in the ordinance, address who can present evidence either in support or against. Do you have an opinion as to if the public should or should not?
Yes.
Yeah, well, in the case of a planning commission, obviously both sides have the opportunity to make a case. You can organize to have people on both sides of an issue. So I don't think there should be any less ability to make a case in
Okay.
front of an administrative law judge.
Okay.
Capture that?
Okay, that's good. So then, taking it to, so we kind of just, where we're at there was the recommending level. So the ALJ or planning commission making a recommendation. The ultimate decision maker, any thoughts on who that should be? Should it be the final stop as the planning commission, or should we keep it the same as the vested rights where the ultimate decision maker is the board of supervisors? Bear in mind with the planning commission, it would still be appealable to the board of supervisors, but the decision maker without appeal would be the planning commission, or should we have it be the same as vested rights where the final decision maker is the Board of Supervisors. Any thoughts on that potential situation?
Can I get a raise of hands of anyone who thinks it's a good idea that the takings exemption should have a similar procedure for processing that request
Vested
as
rights.
vested rights? Whatever that process is, they should be similar. So we've got some folks who support that. Anyone adamantly against them having similar processes?
Anybody who just doesn't care?
So we got a few people.
Okay, so I think that I'm hearing is they weren't sure. So here's the simple question. When we start talking about vested rights, when I have a vested rights, I think I have a vested rights exemption. I want to get it to the decision maker. Who should my decision maker be in the Monterey County? Should it be the Planning Commission? Should it be the Board of Supervisors? Should it be a hearing officer? How high should that go? Should it be exactly the same as what's already decided in the measure for takings, or for takings where it's already the Board of Supervisors, or should it be lower?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
These are, really difficult. These are difficult questions. I was wondering, can we provide you with feedback? Okay, get it.
Absolutely.
Next week or so,
Yeah.
'cause
So
I
we'll send out an email after
Yeah.
this with everyone that's on the
I
list.
feel like this is,
Absolutely. But this is just meant to be a discussion. So I mean,
Okay, so-
you have a microphone.
okay.
Do you have any thoughts on who should be the ultimate decision maker when it comes to taking? Should it get all the way to the Board of Supervisors, or is Planning Commission enough? Or vested rights? Thank you. Will you go back to the slide,
I guess I'm
Jack?
inclined to say something similar, but I feel like we need some time and to give you input. Can we do that in writing? Like
You're welcome to send emails, absolutely. Yeah, okay. So we can move on to somebody else if someone else
And
has an
I want to
opinion.
clarify, what you say here, we're not holding you, this is not law, we're not making decisions, we're capturing ideas, and you can share ideas later
I think
with
this
us.
gentleman right here hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
I mean, I just say, I think it would be we're gonna be working on these procedures in the next couple months, so for anybody in the room, or anybody who's not in the room, who's your friend, or a person, client you represent, if they want to submit a letter and let us know your thoughts on any part of this, that will be helpful. We will read it. I don't know what we'll decide when we write. We're gonna, work on it to make sure it meets with due process, fits the parameters of Measure Z, those kind of things, and then ultimately present something to the board. The board will have an opportunity, then you all have an opportunity to speak. But to the extent we can get people's thoughts ahead of time,
Thanks. Yeah,
that's
that's a great point. We sincerely want your input. That's why we're here. Go ahead.
Hi, I had a question probably for you, Wendy. So there's already, as you know, a part of the Monterey County Code that addresses an exemption for vested rights. And I was wondering what the county's opinion is on to what extent that applies to Measure Z, or whether it applies at all, or whether you intend to draft a whole new process.
Okay, so let's put that. We're gonna put that up on the question for
What's your
later.
opinion? We
Hold on a
recognize
second,
that,
Wendy.
I was going to say, that's a good question, and we certainly recognize that Title 21 has a vested rights termination, so does Title 20. And, I mean, while we might, one of the questions is, do you do a separate oil and gas chapter? It's this question Brandon's asking, because under the current Title 21, that goes to the Planning Commission, and then that's appealable to the board. But under Measure Z, the Board of Supervisors makes the takings determination, and there's some overlap between vested rights and takings. So, do you really want, if you follow the Title 21, Title 20 process, you've got a Planning Commission appealable to the board, but what if somebody's got a combined, so it leads to these logistical questions.
So do you have, this is what really important is your opinion. So do you have an opinion of where it should go to a decision maker, how the process might look?
I think generally I like the idea of an independent administrative law judge to the extent that both sides are allowed to present evidence.
Okay.
I think that would be, to have a non-political actor make the decision would be good.
Okay.
I think the existing vested rights determination process is fine. I think, Wendy, I like the idea of adding some provisions in the oil and gas context and adding specific findings.
So I'm going to pause you so we
Yeah,
can
yeah,
capture
sure.
it. Frida, can you go to the vested rights page? So one of it is the idea that we have an existing vested rights policy, so to the extent that we follow it, that's good. Perhaps adding, clarifying, and specific provisions.
Yeah, adding
to the oil and gas.
specific factual findings that
Yeah.
relate specifically to oil and gas.
Okay.
So
In
there's
addition to
specific factual
in
findings
addition
for
to
oil
the
and
existing
gas.
Good.
findings.
That's a great comment. Thank you. Specific. There you go. Okay. Anybody else on vested rights, decision maker and process.
I just want to talk about the issue of transparency.
Okay.
Comment was made about confidentiality. I think it's extremely important that, as you said before, you post this within a few hundred yards. When you're talking about this issue, the public notification of every exemption request should be to, like the email list. Anyone who's interested in knowing about every exemption that comes in should be notified with plenty of time to respond and give equal time to hearing their side.
Great. Okay, so we'll have a suggestion is
10
a
days isn't
specific,
enough.
notification list for anything oil and gas related.
The other thing I wanted to say about confidentiality, I was involved when they drew up SB 4, the state law, and confidentiality is a huge hiding hole. I think that if you're talking about facts, you give the facts. If your facts are too confidential to give, then they should be excluded from this process.
Okay, only have things be confidential that truly are confidential.
No, I said nothing confidential.
Well, there are certain things that are confidential, like social security numbers and things like that, that we.
No, I mean, trade secrets, what kind of chemicals you're pumping down there.
Yeah, so that's why I have the note here that says things that actually truly are confidential, like social security numbers and things like that. That's what should be kept confidential. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Not corporate trade secrets. If they have to be secret to that extent, they can't be part of the
Okay, thank you.
So we have over here a comment.
I'm Jan Schreiner, and I heard that comment about the LJ in the previous section. In this section, or I hope you would include an ALJ with some water comprehension, and I've heard 300 feet from the property line, but I would recommend anyone who's more or less downstream from the impounding or the injection be notified, so the property line may be replaced by aquifer, or perhaps even comes to mind the Salinas Valley Groundwater Basin. And there's a new organization the county is participating in, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, brand new GSA governing board that may be really helpful in your review process.
Okay, those are two. So I've got two really good notes there. One is making sure that if we do go with a hearing officer or ALJ, that they have some sort of specialty or understanding of what they're actually hearing from an environmental or technical standpoint. The second one is when we're doing our noticing, take into account things like water flowing downstream, where that water may flow, anyone within the affected areas of that tributary or water body or anything like that. Okay, both of those. Okay.
Another comment?
They always told me when you're going to address people, stand in front of them. I hate looking at the back of people's heads. My name's Scott Violini. We have a board of supervisors, 5 of them.
Correct.
Okay. They're elected officials, right? The planning commission are nominated by the board of supervisors, correct?
They're appointed.
They're appointed, right? And under those appointments, there's a certain level of, they have to adhere to certain rules and regulations as an appointed official of an elected official, correct? Therefore, I would assume that if we have 5 board of supervisors, we would look to them to appoint possibly 5 people to dictate this, rather than just one person. You know, we have our little meetings and stuff. You people are all busy, okay? I'm paying taxes for you people to sit here, and I'm going to tie my shoelaces and go in a circle. When we have elected officials that are supposed to be making our decisions with the help of our RMA. Because you guys are the ones that are doing the dirty work every day of the week. You guys know Title 21, you know the zoning, you know how this is. But to have hearing officers and you know, a citizenry deal and people that really maybe don't have a stake that much in the game, whether you don't have to be a landowner, you know, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that, but it should be left up to the Board of Supervisors, I personally feel, because they are an elected official. If I don't like what one of them is doing, I'll just change my vote in another 4 years. That's what that's my level of structure because you have things that you're tied to as an appointed person. Then we're not running willy-nilly. I mean, I've got a lot of ideas, vested, for vested rights. Somebody takes my private property rights every day of the week. I have somebody trying to figure out how they're going to take away what I do for a living and my private property rights. Because they don't like the fact that, hey, he's out there doing this, he owns all that. Yeah, I do. I didn't own it, my grandfather owned it. And we work our asses off every day of the week. I'm not going around, that we need to go to our elected officials, and this is great. I mean, I love this. We've got an entire group of people that probably agree to disagree on things.
But they're engaged, and that's great. That's what we're here
thank
for.
you.
Yeah. So if I'm taking, I think I heard a couple there. So in your suggestion, the ultimate decision maker is board of supervisors because they're accountable to the constituents. Folks, you actually have a pathway to get to them if you don't like. So board of supervisors because they're accountable to the citizens. I think I heard you say this. Maybe I just made this up. But were you saying something about the board of supervisors maybe implementing a panel of 5 folks?
We have
advisory
boards.
Like a LUAC, like a land use advisory committee.
We have advisory boards.
Okay.
And we have your Toro Land Use Advisory Board, because I live up in this area.
That's
and
exactly
if I
right.
have a problem with it and I don't like what's going on, by God, I'm going to be sitting there at that meeting and I'm going to tell a few people that we all know that what I think and what I don't think.
Okay.
I think we really have to go through the process that's already been set up. Because this reinventing the wheel, there's a lot of stuff we got to get done in this county after our, little fires.
True words have never been spoken, my friend. Yeah, you're totally right. So I think so. We'll take that note. So
Thank you.
like an oil and gas advisory committee or something like that appointed by the board.
Started our basic level, and we have to follow the channels of elected officials and the process, because you have to take ethics trainings and other such things that tie you into these things to where you can't, you can't violate ethics.
Okay.
AB 1234, look it up.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We got somebody else. Okay, Megan.
I was concerned that we all have to stand in the front of the room to
No, you
get much
certainly
time.
don't.
So can we please move along as you're hurrying everybody else? Let's be just here.
Okay, I think we got a couple of really good suggestions out of that gentleman on topic, so that was great. Who's up next?
I do have one concern.
Okay.
When I did a little property line adjustment in Sonora, I had to notify 27 people because they were within 300 yards. But twice, as a larger landowner, at Turkey Flat when the solar project went in, it was quite far along the planning process, and even though our property is adjacent to property that was constructed on, we were not notified because we were 300 feet from the project.
Okay.
So sometimes the people do not even they don't notify landowners. 300 feet is a very far.
Okay, so I'm taking your note. You think it should be a very much broader circle of notification. Okay.
And that's happened to me twice. Once the construction was actually on my property by a tenant, and I just happened to see it on a planning commission agenda. Not the first hearing either.
Okay, great. So consider a broader scope or broader width of notification. Okay.
I would suggest the electorate would be the right one. That's what put this in motion.
Okay, hold on a second. We're back here, and then we come back to you if you have a suggestion on this topic.
Christy Toronto. I'm going back to the question I asked earlier, and I still don't understand this process. What you've said is this is speculation on the process once we've decided how we're going to do it. However, I'm still at sea here with the fact that if people want to drill on their land, is the litigation by the oil companies allowing them to do that? And is that what we're discussing here?
No, that's not what we're discussing. So just simply answer your question, that's not what we're discussing.
But what I'm wondering is we're speculating on what to do once that's solved. Are we saying that my impression of Measure Z was that no one else could drill for oil? That there could not be any.
There are certain exemptions.
Do you think we should say
exceptions to that, that may be processed through a public decision-making process. What we're trying to do today is figure out the process for when somebody wants to ask for one of those exemptions to continue in some form or another. How do we get that to the decision maker? How do we get that to the folks, the electorate that we've decided are the folks making the decision? That's what we're trying to do today, is figure out how do we get that to the decision makers.
And that would be an exemption for someone that already has a well or is wanting to drill.
Yeah, I know, I want to be, in the name of transparency, and I think you heard Charles McKee's presentation at the Board of Supervisors. And we had 2 lawsuits, I think we're up to 3 lawsuits now, and the number may grow. We have a stay in place with the ERA and Chevron lawsuits. However, it doesn't stay the entirety of Measure Z, and we don't want to turn this into a discussion of is the stay a good thing or a bad thing and all the particulars of the stay. Under the stay, ERA and Chevron have said they are not going to pull any permits from the state for well stimulation treatments, including hydraulic fracturing and or acid well stimulation. And the stay also does not stop the county from drafting and adopting these procedures that we're meeting on today, and then from owners applying under those procedures and and that exemption process from occurring. As Carl stated earlier, it's very conceivable that the litigation could be ongoing while we being the county, adopts these exemption procedures and then has these processes that ultimately go to, say, the Planning Commission or Board of Supervisors, as per our chart, where the board will be deciding on exemptions, yes or no, or the extent of the exemption.
Okay, thanks, Wendy.
Now, would that would also mean that that would all be public, and the public would be allowed to go to the Board of Supervisors and weigh in as to whether or not...
So that's part of you're hitting the nail on the head right there. So I'm going to take from you what you just said, I'm going to turn it into a note, so it's part of this. You want to be a part of the public process. You want as much notice as many times as possible.
For anybody that is making an
Any
application.
exemptions, that's right, okay, great. So that's exactly what we're trying to do today, is we're trying to figure out where do you want to be involved in the process, how often you want to be involved in the process. So we're going to jump off on that topic right there. So does anyone have any thoughts on how you want to be notified, how often you want to be notified, anything like that? If we talked about the circle should be bigger than 300 feet, we should consider things downstream, regardless of distance. Any other considerations for public information input, part of the process? Anybody thoughts on that?
Thank you. I felt that for this particular meeting, it wasn't enough time, so I think it was 10 days or so. Because a lot of times it takes a while to get the word out and get enough people, so
more than 10 days?
More than 10 days,
okay,
yeah.
Thank you. That's a good note, thank you.
That's why, a number of our folks could come to me. The other thing is, I'm sorry, I was just wondering, I had contacted your office to find out, what are we going to talk about here? So the information, and then there's an agenda, but, having had a little bit more information about what the format of this would have been more helpful.
Okay.
Because our group was, we didn't really know. And I think similarly, if there's any written documents that people could study a little bit to prepare, trying to answer some of the questions that we pose were kind of difficult for someone like me who hasn't had time to prep. So anyway, I think it would be really important to have documents and make the whole process as, I know there's an emphasis on confidentiality by some people, but from my perspective and the folks who worked on Measure Z, I think transparency and as much full disclosure as possible so that citizens can be involved and help in this process.
Okay, great. You get all those, Rita?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And I do want to come back to this nice lady over here in the blue shirt. She had a comment, and I had to go with someone in the back who hadn't spoken yet, so.
Well, just in terms of the scope of who should be informed, I was suggesting the electorate because the electorate is really what created this measure over the fact that at the time the Board of Supervisors refused to do that. That's what Measure Z into existence. So
that would be our notice body. Would
so
be
that's
the
the body
electorate.
that's interested.
Great.
They wouldn't have voted.
Great comment. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else on public comment, public input? Right here.
for the process, whether it's whatever body that's hearing this or whatever judge is hearing this, if the evidence they're considering can be posted online, so letters submitted, comments submitted, their record be made available online to the public, it'd be easier.
And you're talking about not only if it was a hearing officer, but planning commission, whatever recommending body or decision-making body, just getting all the evidence up on so that the public can weigh both sides of the story.
Yes.
Okay. So both sides of the story, regardless of the recommending body or decision maker, all relative documents out for people to look at. Anybody else on input, information, notices?
I guess
Another
for
one, new one right here.
notification, maybe also with the public service announcements, such as KSBW have a public service announcement, and then also for the newspapers, social media, and then again with at least 30 days, like they mentioned something far more ahead.
So I'll repeat that because I don't know if folks can hear you with the microphone. So the comment was look at some alternate avenues, because right now when we do notices, we do put them in the newspaper already, and we post publicly at the site. So maybe look at some additional resources like KSBW's, they do like a community thing at the end of their broadcast. Look at social media, which the county's coming into this century and starting to do social media things, so we're excited about that. So just as many avenues for notice as possible, not all the standard ones.
That's the right process?
Well, yeah, I was thinking again a little bit more about this notice, that even if it was a citizens initiative, maybe a social media, a page that lists upcoming, exemptions and vested right.
So we have currently
procedures, so that any kind of one-stop shopping, so anybody can know that these things are coming up.
That's a good idea. So right now, this isn't hooked up to the internet, but for anyone that's been to the county website, you can get to the RMA website, and then within the RMA, we have Public Works, we have Planning, we have all the different agencies underneath RMA. Planning has a website underneath the RMA website, and if you go there, we just recently redid our website. It's really sort of modern looking. There's a grid of 9 boxes, little blue boxes with little icons on them that are easy to understand what they are. The bottom right-hand box is oil and gas. So maybe something like that on our website, we could have a link to upcoming oil and gas issues or exemptions or something like that. So people would know it's always in the same spot. Not necessarily on Facebook or anything like that, but our website is obviously public-facing too. So something, just a place for, you got that somewhere? Okay.
Is that easy to find? Because I find sometimes things are a little buried.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, websites for an organization as broad as the county are sometimes very difficult to get through, but you could easily Google RMA Planning, Monterey County RMA Planning. You can also go to the main homepage now. It's also been upgraded. I don't know if you've been there recently, but you just go to government and it has all the different departments. So Resource Management Agency is going to get you there. Any website, you got to do a little bit of poking around, but ours has definitely gotten better in the last year. I promise you that.
And we can, as a part of the follow-up to this, we're going to distribute the presentation. We can also provide the link to the oil and gas site because the presentation will be uploaded there as well. So we'll try to get that direct link for folks. You can save it in your favorites. Thanks.
That's a good one.
Any other thoughts, comments on the process? Because we can go, let's flip to the next slide because the discussion really continues. Actually, go back one, sorry, Jack. So I would like to do, just to sort of like pulse the room here, who thinks that the ultimate decision maker, this is your opinion, no one's going to hold you to this. I'd like everyone to raise their hand for one or the other. It's 2 options. There's no, I don't want to participate. Either you think the Planning Commission should be the ultimate decision maker on these, or it should be the Board of Supervisors just like the other one. So let's do Planning Commission first, ultimate decision maker for vested rights exemptions. Nobody wants to raise their hand for that one unless everybody wants a Board of Supervisors. Board of Supervisors for ultimate decision maker. Okay, so we've got at least half of the room, and that's the majority because only one raised their hand for the other one. So majority of the room thinks that Board of Supervisors should be the ultimate decision maker, just like we have for takings. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Reasonable amortization exemption process, that is a mouthful. So we've got the definition again here up front. Really, it's the same discussion for this. I think we've covered really well the process for gathering the information. Does anyone think just because we're talking about reasonable amortization now that the process for getting the information to the decision maker should be different? Is there something about this that makes you think it should be the planning commission, where on the other ones it should be a hearing officer. Any thoughts on that? Who should be the recommending body for this?
Well, this one, doesn't the law actually, or the initiative actually says the planning
Required
commission
as
and
the
then
decision.
is the
The planning decision is the
Appeal.
decision maker.
And it's appealable to the board.
Appealable to the board.
So
So,
it's process before that.
Yep, so in this one, just pretend, and the other two we sort of discussed, one was already decided that the Board of Supervisors was the decision maker. We just, as a consensus, sort of decided that the Board of Supervisors may be the decision maker for vested rights. The way that the measure is written, the Planning Commission is the decision maker for amortization. Who should be making that recommendation to the Planning Commission? Should it be an administrative law judge? Should it just be the planning department?
Advisory committee.
An advisory committee, should it be something like a LUAC, which was an idea that was thrown out earlier? So any thoughts on who should be taking it forward? Who should be making that recommendation to the Planning Commission?
Or what role you as the public might want to play before the recommendation goes
Yeah.
to the planning.
Well, let's try to get an answer on who should be taking it to the Planning Commission first.
Assuming we have all the notice and all the stuff that we've talked about, I would think an advisory committee would be useful.
Advisory committee, okay.
Because they will be able to, with plenty of time, an advisory committee will hold public hearings about their deliberations or whatever, so that the input can still come in. But then the planning commission, I'm on one myself, you know, you only have so much time in the world, and I
Right.
think you would get a more thorough, more comprehensive report to make a decision on.
Sure.
If you can get it that way.
Okay, so an advisory committee, but duly noticed, open to the public, all that good stuff. Okay.
Yesterday, I was at the supervisors meeting, and I had a chance to see how the groundwater basin, I don't remember the official name, I think someone back there knows it, how that was put together, and I was shocked. Frankly, I didn't say anything myself, but I felt it was an exact example of regulatory capture. People on that board are primarily farmers. They got someone from the environmental groups who don't even live in the Salinas Valley. I mean, this is my personal opinion, and I would really be leery personally. I mean, I personally, as a citizen, I would think that's a great idea, but when I saw how that body is going to be making its decision,
Which body is this you're talking about?
This is the
Sustainable
sustainable groundwater.
Okay.
Salinas Valley
Okay.
sustainable groundwater.
Okay, thank you.
You know, it's required by law that they
Okay.
have this, but I can see already the decisions they're gonna make are gonna favor the farmers.
Okay.
There were almost no Latinos, you know, this water is gonna affect the residents of Salinas Valley. So, I mean, as a citizen, I would generally say that sounds like a great idea to have a committee, but the people who are gonna get on that board and who want to be on that board are gonna be ones who benefit. And in this case, I would be very nervous that if we had a body like that, it would be very similar to what I just saw
Okay,
yesterday.
that's a good note. So,
That's my concern.
nervous. So I would write
I would
nervous
trust-
about impartiality.
So I would trust an administrative law judge who came from somewhere else
Okay.
better.
Okay, nervous about impartiality with advisory committees, because it may be made up of folks locally that have some sort of interest in what's going on. So because of that, you would say you prefer an administrative law judge or some sort of hearing officer, neutral third party. Okay. Let's check in right here.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of follow in my experience in employment law.
Yeah, let's get the mic.
Yeah, in my experience.
I can hear him fine, but I don't know.
In my experience in employment law, what happened is there was a tendency for nobody wanting to overturn a lower decision. So it had kind of a momentum that happened. Once one body rendered a decision, it just kind of rolled its way through. And with people rubber stamping, and rarely would anybody ever, turn it over. And so
Was that like with an arbitrator or?
yes,
Okay.
and so that's why I do also have a concern that somehow the first level of review has to be a very unbiased level.
Okay. Okay, so first level review needs to be unbiased and thorough, comprehensive, because there's a chance that it may not be easily overturned.
Yeah,
Okay.
it has a momentum.
Okay, it already has a momentum. Okay, good. Review, unbiased, it may get overturned. Okay, who's next? Doing good here. We got a nice little rhythm going. Anybody, any thoughts on hearing body, recommending body to the decision maker, which is the planning commission? Remembering that when the planning commission is the decision maker, it's appealable to the board of supervisors. Any other thoughts on that one? Okay, we can talk more about Level and structure of public input. Does anyone think that that changes with reasonable amortization? We had a good comment earlier that came up on the second slide because it wasn't necessarily relevant to another one. Is there anything that anyone thinks that's changes with the way you want to be noticed, or what you should be told with regard to amortization, with regard to Measure Z? Anybody?
This is wastewater injection. This is
Yeah,
a
that's
normal
right.
rate.
Correct, yeah.
I think the maximum transparency at all times, and the ability for everyone to know what's going on and to be able to respond to it applies through this process.
I agree. Thank you. That's a great comment. I think we captured that on all three of the exemption criteria. Anybody else? Going once, going twice, 3 times. I'm going to move on. Okay, next slide. So we did it. We made it through the 3 exemptions. I think we understand where everyone's coming from. We want to get a lot of notice out there. We want to get it out far ahead of time. We want a broader scope of notice. We talked about who the advisory or who the recommending body should be, who the decision maker should be when that's applicable. Let's just go through really quickly and make sure we didn't capture anything incorrectly. So a lot of these are going to be repeats because it's really the same question on all 3. We talked about takings first. Let's see, we should have some sort of neutral judge, less biased, non-county. That was one suggestion we had. Public noticing. Anytime a request comes in from the public for any sort of exemption larger than the 300-foot time frame should be put into the ordinance so people can understand how long it's going to take to get to the decision making. We want to balance with a quick process, with a thorough process, make sure that we're actually doing the work correctly and getting all the information in there. But we want to also move it along quickly so people aren't held up for a long time. What does this say, Frida?
Consideration how many times a judge.
That's right. Consideration of how many times a judge can go back and forth. Public list of potential judges. Okay, so that people know who the potential list are of folks that are going to be these neutral arbitrators. More of the takings. Ensure confidential information. Ensure that we're only classifying information as confidential that truly is confidential. Things like social security numbers. Being aware of the fact that some things may not truly be confidential information, like what types of chemicals. We will have to obviously look at that and decide what is and is not confidential, but we'll stick to the letter of the law, what truly is confidential.
And I think the clarification was to be sure that that's considered in the ordinance.
That's right. Yep.
Well, and what
and that's the next thing I was going to say. The ordinance should address that directly.
No, wait, I want to say one.
Mirror the process. Yeah. So okay. So yeah. So one thing we got from taking it should mirror the vested rights process as well. So next one, vested rights. Who can present evidence, pros and cons. Making sure that one comment we heard from the folks that had an idea of the planning commission being the hearing body or the recommending body is that there should be a forum for everyone to get up and present their pros and cons to an argument. Both sides should be able to make it clear. Having an existing, adding specific findings regarding vested rights. Confidential info, we talked about that again.
We're going to allow confidentiality, or which way?
Public noticing, provide time to respond, so more than, I heard the comment, more than 10 days. Should be a longer comment period. Residents down the street. Okay, so this gets to the notification circle, where there's potential water being affected. We need to look at folks down the street because just because they're not within a 300-foot circle, they may be affected. So we need to involve them in the noticing as well. Making sure we get qualified arbitrators, impartial parties that have a technical understanding of what they're actually talking about, so that they can make intelligent decisions. Vested rights, we had a comment here, should be left to the Board of Supervisors because they're accountable to the citizens. They're elected officials, and so the ultimate decision on whenever possible should be made by the Board of Supervisors because there's a path for you as the citizens of the county to get to them much easier. Let's see, Board of Supervisors implement oil and gas committee. So this is one, they could stand up a committee like a land use advisory committee to review these applications. broader area of notification. This is what we see running through the whole thing. As much notice as possible. Okay, we talked about that. More than 10 days notice. Written documents prior to the meeting. Needing time to prepare. Public wanting to have more time to read because there may be a large volume of technical documents in this world that it would be nice to have more than 5 days to look at stuff. So we'll take note of that. And more noticing electronic noticing. Things like online, Facebook, our website, utilizing the internet as much as possible. Having recommending body, posting docs online, we got that notice. More notice stuff. What's this one? Pay listings.
Extensions to list on one page, so being able to list the listings and exemptions on one page, what's come out.
Oh, okay. So they're all on either one page. I would think a paper page, like one internet page. So like you could go to our county website where I was explaining the block of nine circles. You click on the oil and gas one, you get to go right there, and then we'll provide a link to the oil and gas for everybody leading this. There's your ultimate decision maker and board supervisors. Okay. That was fast. I'm sorry I went through that fast, but I don't think I said anything. Did anybody hear something that was like 180 degrees from what they said? I think I captured everything pretty right on what everybody got.
Shorthand.
Shorthand Frida, that's what we call her. Okay, so that gets to, go back for me. We're not done yet. Still thank you, but not thank you yet. So reviewed the input. What I'd like to do is take maybe 5 or 10 minutes if someone has a burning question, because we said we would do it. I'm going to regret this. But,
Randy, start over here. Can I?
Sure.
Can I quickly close out the comments?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So just the next steps in terms of, we started the day just saying this is the start of developing these procedures. Staff, we're going to go back, we're going to look at the law, we're going to look at the initiative, we're going to take a look at all the thoughts and comments and ideas that were shared today. We're going to be developing these procedures over the next few months. We will be taking them to a decision body. There will be a formal hearing and an opportunity for public input. We'll be balancing a lot of pieces in there. So for just kind of next steps for this process, for developing the procedures, that's where we're going to go. And we just really thank you guys for helping to brainstorm and sharing your thoughts and ideas.
I just wanted to clarify one thing you said. So will there be a hearing on the draft before it goes to the board, or is it just going to go to the board and that's the hearing?
We don't know. Well, so if we amend zoning, I don't think it's not clear to me whether these amend zoning. If it amends the zoning, then it would go to the Planning Commission for a hearing first, these procedures we're talking about, and then to the Board of Supervisors. Staff might decide, though, to just bring it to the Planning Commission, even if it doesn't have to go to the Planning Commission, for sort of an initial public hearing on the draft procedures. And I guess I also want to highlight with great summary that this is sort of a brainstorming. So I learned a lot, took a ton of notes myself. Not making any promises here, because there's some issues that we really need to look at, like this issue of confidentiality. And I heard we have some differences of opinion, and we're going to have to figure out, first of all, where we can land legally, but then also that's going to be a policy issue potentially as well. Like, are we going to say that if you want to submit, don't submit anything that you think is a trade secret because we want to have everything be transparent, or are we going to promise that there will be some process for trade secrets? I don't know the answer to that.
But we'll consider it, but that's why we
That's
came here.
one of
that's
the kind of
now.
issues
Yeah.
we'll have to
Yep.
look at
That's right.
when we draft the procedures, and then it won't be our decision. It'll be the Board of Supervisors within the context of the law when they implement the procedures. So would you guys want to have a public hearing at the Planning Commission on the procedures? Would that be helpful?
Just talking the procedures again, just
Yeah.
what we talked about today. Show of hands, who would like to have, so it's basically the question is, do you want 2 public hearings or do you want 1 public hearing? 2 public hearing means Planning Commission. Who wants Planning Commission? Just for
draft.
moving.
That would be a
this
draft.
process forward.
They would be making a recommendation.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm hearing there's
Planning Commission, we've got.
there's some interest in doing
yeah,
that.
so then,
Yeah.
other people think we should only have 1, or other people just don't want to raise their hand.
And that, we found in the general plan implementation context that, you get interesting input and they see things and you go, oh, wait, that's what you thought that meant? Oh, we didn't mean that. Okay, let me go back to the drawing boards and rewrite that.
So the public get to see a draft of your ordinance.
Absolutely. So the Planning Commission Board of Supervisors has its existing process already where we notice it, goes out, the staff reports go out ahead of time. You can come and comment and do your testimony, just like the normal proceedings. So that's why we have to go through that process. For this, put a process through a process, basically. Okay, so I want to take 10 minutes because I promised you guys I would do this. We do have to get out of here at 6 because they're going to close the room on us and we won't get to go home. So we're going to 10 minutes of questions that you held over from the meeting. Move to the back of the room here real quick. Wait for the microphone because you have a lovely soft voice.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess it's part of the next steps, but since it's so hard to get information about the chemicals that are being injected or in chronic, can we, as a public, input things like known neurotoxins, known carcinogens as part of, you don't even get an exemption. If you have known neurotoxins in your injection water, you are not going to get an exemption.
I'll defer to counsel on this one because I think that in that realm we just have to process based on the specific.
Are you parking these questions? Are we?
What's that?
Maybe we should park.
We can, okay, well that would be, we could park them if you want.
Yeah, I mean, just.
Just make sure we have the question.
Okay, maybe we'll do that then. Maybe that'd be better. So we can give you a nice researched answer.
Well,
I'll write them up here and then we'll send out the answer to the group. How's that sound? I think that's a good.
If we send it, I don't know if we want to promise we're going to send out answers to like the $1 million questions here. So what I would say is we will take account of your questions and maybe as we go forward to the extent we can answer them in these public hearing processes, we can do that, like in a staff report.
So maybe the response to that was
that kind of thing, because I don't want to, but in general, I'm just going to say that a super generic answer to your question is, yeah, okay. A super generic answer to your question is that, right here, we're here to implement Measure Z. So that, if that's not in Measure Z, that's a whole other thing you're talking about. And so we're right now focused on implementing Measure Z. And as you know, there's lots of questions about the state. It regulates the operations of oil and gas exploration. County has land use power. And so what your question seems to be, closer to the line of, downhole operations. I mean, again, very off the cuff. I'm not giving you a definitive answer, but we're really here to just, implement the regulations that were put into Measure Z. That's not in Measure Z. Of course, if you want to go to the Board of Supervisors, if we don't put it in there, you're welcome to say to the Board of Supervisors, I would like the regulation for you never to find a vested right if they use these chemicals. But that's not really the test for vested rights. So not exactly sure how that would fit into the exemptions that we have. But, I don't want to, that's just kind of a very broad brush.
That's a good answer, thanks, Wendy. And I think that's important to sort of note that, we can only answer, we came here prepared to talk about this process and putting the process together for getting to the board. So the questions really should be more tailored to what we talked about today. The broader questions about Measure Z, the big, we're not prepared to talk about all that today. So just try to keep the questions focused on that if we can. We'll try our best, but
I think we have 2 more.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 more. One, and then we're
Okay, maybe this is for Wendy. In terms of implementing Measure Z, next week the Bureau of Land Management is having a hearing about allowing oil and gas operations, expanded oil and gas operations on their land. It's in Salinas, and the question is, has the county decided to communicate with the Bureau of Land Management regarding those procedures next week? Do you know about the BLM hearings?
I'm deferring to resource management. I don't know that we're aware of it.
No, actually, I have not gotten notice relative to that, but that's a whole separate thing as far as BLM leases beyond the county, other than if the county is interested in the land, which we aren't. So.
I mean, the county has participated in the past, submitted a comment on a NEPA document related to a BLM lease. I mean, that was some years ago, but it's separate from Measure Z.
Okay. So we got time for one more, and then we do have to close out. So,
my question is, I asked you before, if science shows that there is no merit in something, are you still going to prioritize your mechanics of going through the motions here on something that science shows there's no basis for it. Is it science, or is it, I'm just going to do my job and I'm going to control the conversation and I'm going to say, well, if you don't like it, you can leave? Is it going to be that, you know, or are you going to actually get investigating into where the contamination is and where it's coming from, which is agriculture?
So I think that's probably another question that we're not necessarily prepared to answer today, because we're here to talk about the process for implementing these exemptions.
The process must be decided on science, or
Okay, so let's put
it's a
that-
whole waste of time.
Okay, we'll put that as a note up here to
It's
consider science as part of the
either based on
implementation of the process.
science or it's not.
Excellent. Okay, we'll consider science when we're implementing the procedure as well. Thank you.
Finally, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for
I
coming.
think
Melanie,
the other two.
Melanie said it once already, but I want to say it again. Thank you for coming out today. I hope everyone got to say their piece.
Thank you.
If you want to be contacted moving forward, make sure you get your name on the sign-up sheet and back. Everyone drive safe. Thanks for coming. Thank you. Yeah, take care.